Today, I'll be discussing two main aspects related to child health, which is growth and development. Of course, we will have time for discussion at the end of the session, and the questions do not need to focus on the topic I'm presenting. It can be any parenting related questions that you have, either related to acute care of children or anything else. So I would refer you also to my YouTube channel here. The link can be shared by Sylvia to all of you. So this is aimed at parenting, and you have playlists, and most of the topics, including what we are discussing today, management of fever, acute concerns in children, everything is covered, feeding, growth, and development as well. So moving on to growth, all of you know what growth means. It's the physical development of the child. And we have growth parameters which we monitor at regular intervals. We have the weight and the height, which all of you are familiar. And in the younger infants, we also monitor the head circumference. In medical terms, we call it the occipitofrontal circumference. The frontal is the front and the occipit is the back. So because the tape runs through, we call it the OFC or occipitofrontal circumference. It's more important in the younger children because the brain grows fast in the earlier stages, and it's important to confirm that the head growth is consistent with the brain growth. So we usually measure at the time of birth and in the first week when the weight loss and the gain happen subsequently. We monitor them closely to ensure the feeding is going well. The subsequent monitoring, if the weight gain is good in the initial assessment, is at vaccination visits, which usually in the UAE, it's in 2, 4, and 6 months. Most of the developed countries follow this schedule, while in the developing world, like India or Sri Lanka or Pakistan, for example, it may be a bit quicker than that because they want to immunize you against illnesses faster. So they start at 6 weeks, then 10 weeks and 14 weeks. But you don't need to check the weight and height apart from the vaccination visits unless you have specific concerns. After that, we usually review the child for growth and development at 9 months and 1 year, and subsequently 6 monthly intervals usually is adequate. And again, there are optional vaccines which are usually given around these times, so you can time it. The follow-up usually can be timed, and apart from your visit to the pediatrician for illnesses, the rest of the visits can center around your time of vaccination so that the growth, development, and vaccination all happen at the same time. Some important facts that you need to know about the growth. So the birth weight is a reflection of the weight at the time of birth, and all babies have a little extra fluid. So you might remember that the baby lost weight in the first week to 10 days. And if you're going to be a parent soon, then you would know that in the first week to 10 days, the babies lose about 10% of the weight. They then start gaining weight. It's very important at this stage that we monitor the feeding support, because breastfeeding is obviously the best feeding. We need to support the breastfeeding as best as we can. The feeding establishment may take 2-3 days, and you need the support of your family, the lactation consultants, and also the urine output and the sleeping pattern can be a guide. So the pediatrician will usually arrange to review you in the clinic 2 or 3 days after discharge to check both the weight and the jaundice. And if there is inadequate weight gain, if you should at least see a stabilizing by that time. If there is inadequate weight gain, you may discuss supporting feed with express milk, for example. So the weight gain after the feed is established is around 20 to 30 grams per day in the first month. It then drops slowly and stabilizes. Remember that each child grows at a different pace according to the family tendency, the actual birth weight of the child, which puts the baby on a certain spot on the growth chart called the percentile for that baby. So a percentile is the distribution of the weight in relation to 100 children. And if your baby is on the 50th percentile, it means the baby is on average growth pattern. Some babies grow lower than that, some babies grow higher than that. And that's what we mean by follow the centile for your baby's growth. Of course, there are some conditions where the baby may be bigger at birth. For example, if the mother has gestational diabetes, the baby tends to be a bit on the heavier side, but these babies may slow down in the growth pace because during the in utero period, they were growing fast because of the mother's diabetes, but then after birth, the growth pattern in the family will take over. So your pediatrician will be able to assess all these factors and discuss the actual expected growth. It's very important that we don't overfeed the baby. We don't push them to keep feeding more to gain weight because it doesn't help. It's better to go with the natural process, and there are long-term concerns if the baby grows fast, as we will discuss later. There are apps for growth monitoring available, and you have free apps as well. You can download them. You can plot and monitor your baby's trajectory. If you are measuring the weight at home, you can check it every 2 weeks. You have the weighing scale on which you weigh yourself, then you can hold the baby and the difference will give you the baby's weight. The height doesn't need to be checked frequently. It's more tricky to measure the height, and you can do that at the clinic visits. Head circumference, unless there is a concern that the head is growing too fast, you don't need to check it other than the clinic visits as well. This is an example of how a growth chart looks like. This is from the CDC. You can download growth charts from the WHO, and most of the current growth charts from CDC or the Royal College in UK are all based on the WHO growth chart in the first 2 years, because these are based on breastfeeding babies. Typically, breastfeeding babies grow slower than the formula-fed babies, but it is a healthier growth pattern. Don't expect the baby to be chubby. Leanness is better. And in terms of age, you have months along the x-axis, and you have the weight in kilos along the y-axis. If it is a height, you have the length in centimeter along the y-axis. So the bottom part is the weight and the top part is the height. And when we plot the child's weight according to the age, suppose the child is 3 months and weighs 6 kilos, this child would be close to the average weight. So this is in blue, which means it's a boys growth chart. You have girls growth chart in pink. Boys typically grow faster than girls. So this is another important point for you to remember. If your baby was born premature, the growth trajectory is different, and we start from 0 here when the corrected age of the baby reaches full term. So if your baby was born at 32 weeks, for example, your baby was 2 months premature. So we start using the normal chart only from the time the baby is 2 months old, and that is the corrected age of term. So this is explained in simple videos on my channel as well. So there are many factors that influence growth. One is the birth weight, and I explained also how in certain conditions like maternal diabetes, the birth weight may be higher than what you expect otherwise. The family growth pattern is very important, but the genetic pattern is not predictable. There may be a child who grows fast and a child who grows slow in the same family, because the genes can come from one side of the parent's family to the other side. A history of short stature in the family can be in the grandparents or in the parent siblings even. And as I said, the genes are present, but how they manifest differs between the individuals, and which side of the genes you acquired also varies from person to person. So if you have short stature in the family or someone very lean in the family, you might expect them to grow, but not every child will behave the same. So remember that as well. You cannot compare siblings for the same reason. Prematurity affects growth, as I discussed. Of course, very premature babies born at below 28 weeks continue to be on the smaller side, and this is called postnatal growth restriction. And babies who are growth restricted when they are born, a baby who is below 2.5 kilos at full term is usually called low birth weight. And a baby who is below the 10th percentile for that gestation is also called growth restricted or small for gestational age. So these babies also may tend to grow on the smaller side. Some of them show catch-up growth and some of them do not catch up very well. We will discuss that again. I mentioned that the breastfed babies grow at a slower pace relatively. There is a higher chance of overfeeding in formula feeding babies. The protein intake is much higher as well. So overall, that is the reason we want you to breastfeed as best as you can, because the baby controls the intake when you're directly breastfeeding. There is a lower chance of overfeeding the baby. And when you're formula feeding, if the baby stops feeding at a certain volume, don't push them to complete the volume you took, and adjust the feed volume according to what the baby needs, not according to what is written on the tin. So these are very important points you need to remember in terms of feeding. The catch-up growth is described as a growth where the rate of growth is faster than you expect otherwise. And this is seen in babies who are growth restricted, and also in the premature babies after the initial period of slow growth. The timing of catch-up growth varies. It's mostly within the first 6 months. Sometimes the catch-up growth may be late by 1 to 2 years of age. As a parent, many parents get frustrated if the child is growing slower compared to, say, a sibling or a cousin in the family or their friend's baby. So it's better to be aware of what your growth trajectory for the baby is based on the birth centile and also the overall growth pattern in the family. So if you are breastfeeding, as I said, the baby can self-regulate better. And if you are formula feeding, try to get the spacing right. Don't push the baby to complete feeds. Don't overinterpret colic as hunger and keep feeding the baby, because that will worsen the problem as well. And there is evidence that if you push the growth restricted babies to feed more and grow faster, it may increase the risk of obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease in the future. So this is called Barker's hypothesis, or a pre-programming effect, because the genes are adjusted to a certain level, and when this changes, the hormone balance, the cortisol effect, and so on changes in the body, and you have a higher risk of obesity and hypertension, both of which may affect your future health. So, not to base or the growth restricted side do not need specific workup if they are maintaining the percentile, they are active with normal development for the age. If the height is on a normal centile or catching up, but the weight is lower, this may reflect leanness. Leanness just means that you have less fat in the body. The muscle bulk is likely to be normal because the growth is normal, the height, I mean. So, leanness is a family pattern, and only reassurance is needed. Avoid force feeding the children. Lean children need less food. So again, because the child is lean, they may eat less than the other sibling. And focus on the quality rather than the quantity of the food. Make yourself aware of the protein content of certain foods, and be careful about high-calorie milks, for example. So there are milks available like Pediasure, which is freely available in the market, which is like 1/3 more calories, more protein than the normal milk. This is good for picky eaters to a certain extent, but not as a regular milk. You can give it as once a day if the child is really picky and you're worried. Again, there are a few videos on picky eating and how to manage it on my channel. I will refer you to that. Moving on to development. So growth and development usually are discussed together because they are both very important to monitor in children. And development is related to maturation from the fetal life to adult life, related to more your functional maturation. So growth is physical and development is functional. It's a combined outcome of both nature and nurture. So nature is from the genes and nurture is how you intervene in the child. For example, if a parent is very attentive, they keep doing things which are ideal. For example, totally removing the screen time, speak to the child, read to the child, play with them appropriate for the age, remove all gadgets which are too noisy or stimulating them too much. Screen time is very important in this aspect of nurture. In the first 2 years, avoiding screen time totally is the best option, because the screen time, anything in the form of phone, tablet, TV, any form of video stimulation is not good at this age, partly because it stimulates the baby too much. The videos are edited, they move at a fast pace, and it comes with accompanying music, which is loud and entertaining as well. So the child starts expecting that pace in life, and also their three-dimensional response. What you do has to have an opposite reaction. Here, the child watches the screen and doesn't need to react in any way. So when you're mutually playing with the child, interacting with the child, you have a social response, while in screen time, there is no social response. So there is a high risk of autism-like spectrum disorders developing, and the child's communication skills may develop badly as well if you don't nurture them properly, if you expose them to excessive screen time. So keep this in mind when you speak to any relatives who have a young baby, and when you actually go across with friends and they see a child sitting with the iPad, teach them not to do that. Discipline also becomes an important issue if there is excess screen time, because the child throws more tantrums because they are used to a fast pace and they are not happy with having anything slow. The development changes rapidly in the first 3 to 4 years, and if there are any concerns, diagnosing these deviations early helps in appropriate intervention and support. So these are the different stages of baby, from being from lying all the time to rolling, to crawling, sitting, walking, and so on. So it's very interesting that the neonatal brain weighs 350 grams. It triples in size by 18 months, and the adult size of 1,350 grams is reached by 7 years. So there is not much brain growth physically after 7 years of age, and there is a very rapid brain growth in the first. So from 350 grams, it reaches almost a kilo, and then there is only 350 gram gain subsequently from 18 months to 7 years. So you can see the rapidity of growth in the first 18 months, and that's why all the interventions that you focus on, like avoiding screen time, stimulating in the proper way, maintaining appropriate nutrition in the first 18 months, are all very important. There are different fields of development. We have the motor milestones or the physical milestones, in which gross motor is the gross milestones related to movement. So you have sitting, walking, rolling, and so on. And the fine motor is a gross and fine manipulative skills like holding a pincer grip, scribbling, and so on, arranging form boards, shapes, and so on. Sensory development deals with vision, hearing, smell, touch, taste, proprioception, or direction sense. Language development has receptive language when they are understanding what you speak, expressive language when they are actually speaking back, and expressive language as a component of language, as well as articulation where your jaw movement has to be coordinated, your tongue has to be appropriate to produce the right sounds. So we have intellectual development, emotional development, social development, where the child learns to function as a member of the society, how they react with the family, how they react with friends, to play with friends reciprocally comes after 2 years onwards. The young children tend to play on their own. And then obeying rules of a game once they start school, once they start playing team games, these things improve as well. And of course, moral and spiritual development depending on your cultural background. There are certain rules in development. And as I explained about the different fields, there is a sequence of events in each field of development. For example, you first have to sit before you can walk. You first have to stand before you can walk. And in terms of fine motor, you have to grip first before you can hold a finer grip. And you certainly have to get a finer grip before you can scribble. So there can be variations in the rate at which these happen, but the sequence is usually similar. There are variations. For example, some children do not crawl and some children sit and shuffle before they walk. So these can be variations, and you do expect some variations in development. The rate of development also doesn't need to be similar in the different fields. For example, a child may do much faster in a motor field. They can run by 9 months, but they are slow in the fine motor or language fields, for example. The gross motor is more related to how well the child grasps, but none of these are very clear indications unless there is a significant delay. The factors affecting development, similar to growth, prematurity also is an important factor that affects development. And even in milestones, when we compare for premature babies, we have to follow the corrected age. We usually correct for prematurity till 18 months to 2 years. The more premature the baby, the longer you correct for the prematurity. A child may be unwell with illnesses which affect the brain, for example, infection affecting the brain called meningitis. There may be birth asphyxia which affects the brain. It's called HIE or hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. Parents of a poorer background tend to have less resources to stimulate. They may have less time to spend with the child. They may have less nutritional backup. So these babies may tend to do poorer. The stimulating environment in the family, having an older sibling, many parents feel is a good stimulation. The child follows the older sibling, wants to mimic them, wants to do it faster. So many parents comment that the second child did things much faster than their first baby. This is the relationship of family environment. The opportunity for play, the parents need to be in a good frame of mind. If the mother is depressed, if she's preoccupied with something, she may not be able to stimulate the child adequately. The father has a very important role in supporting the mother through this period as well. Breastfeeding is, of course, a very good thing for development as well, because the breastfed babies have a better IQ in the first 6 to 9 months compared to the formula-fed babies. We try our best. Formula feeding is not bad, but we have to try our best to achieve breastfeeding. Stimulation in the right way is important. So overstimulating is not good. Exposure to screen time is not good. And I mentioned the importance of nutrition and breastfeeding. We should prevent iron deficiency in young infants, because if iron is deficient, their development may lag as well. So there are important milestones that are defined, and these are often useful to the pediatrician to screen their development. So we have certain age-related milestones we expect the child to achieve. So this depends on the sequence of events in each field of development. And there is a wide range of normal. So a parent doesn't need to compare with another child and say, my child is not smiling at 1 month like the other baby. So because there is a range of 1 to 3 months for social smile, for example, so you can easily wait if the child is otherwise well. And progress of development in individual fields is important. the problems affecting individual field can indirectly affect another field as well. For example, a visual or hearing problem can affect language or fine motor development as well. And there are important milestones which are defined by the age range. Normally, we have routine child surveillance along with the growth monitoring, as I explained, in the newborn period, 6 to 8 weeks, 6 to 9 months, and we should include hearing by that time. Usually, the universal hearing screen is done for all babies at birth. If they fail it, we retest it by 2 weeks to 1 month. We should definitely diagnose deafness before 3 months because intervention before 6 months is shown to change outcome. And at 18 to 24 months, we should also consider dental review, and preschool testing should include formal vision testing as well. So you can see here different trajectories of development can be there. We have the normal range of development. As I said, it's a wide range. And there are babies or children who are slow, but they steadily progress. So these may be the low performers. It doesn't mean their IQ is low. They may show catch up as well. The maturation may be slower. These may be some premature babies, or some term babies behave a little more immature, but the long-term outcome may not be different if they're stimulated and monitored. Then there are some who develop well in the first few weeks to months, and then they start plateauing. And there are many children in the autistic spectrum who show good development in the first year, but then they start plateauing and then they may lose some of their functions. Regression is a very serious indication because they are losing milestones they already attained. For example, they were able to speak something before and they can stop speaking. They may not interact as well. They may have waved bye-bye before or given something in response to commands, but then they stop listening. So if there is any sign of definite regression over time, it's something serious and you need to definitely consult your doctor. So the gap between normal and abnormal increases with advancing age and it becomes more apparent. So sometimes we may not pick up in the early infancy because the gap is not significant, but by 2 to 3 years, it starts becoming more obvious. And hopefully we should not delay pickup of any baby. And that's why each vaccination visit to a pediatrician should be a developmental review for the child as well. So in terms of milestones, in the neonatal period, the baby starts regarding the face. It's sometimes difficult to see if the baby is fixing. You bring bright objects and see if the baby looks at you. Sometimes the baby looks at the mother's face while breastfeeding, and if she gently moves the face in good lighting, the child may follow. So that's a good way to check if the baby is fixing and following. Response to voice is often seen, though the baby doesn't localize the sound till 6 to 9 months. They cannot really exactly look at the direction of the sound in the early stages. And we have primitive reflexes which are automatic. Baby can suck and swallow from the time of birth, and rooting is a way to reach the breast when the baby starts touching the mother's breast. The grasp is also a primitive grasp, and this disappears to form the voluntary grasp later on. So the gross motor development at 6 weeks to 8 weeks, a child starts holding the head. 4 to 5 months, a child can sit with support and can turn from back to the side. And by 6 to 8 months, the child starts rolling from back to stomach and can sit without support. By 9 to 10 months, the child can crawl and start standing, holding on. And by 12 months, most of them walk. If a child doesn't walk by 15 to 18 months, it can be significant and then you may need to review. Again, there is a range of 2 months to whatever is described here. So plus or minus 2 months. Some babies do it faster, some babies do it slower. And if it is a premature baby you're talking about, you need to use the corrected age. So according to the development, you adjust what you're doing. You can consider a feeding chair with cushion by 5 to 6 months if the back is straight. That encourages the child to explore more with the hand. And in terms of toys, avoid a baby walker because there is no real benefit. And actually, because the child is slow walking, they may actually face delay when you actually start walking. There may be risk of accidents because the child is not mature enough to have any form of control over it. There is a risk of toppling over. I've seen children with accidents and even head injury from using a walker. So discourage its use in your relatives as well. In terms of vision, by 6 weeks, a child can fix and follow. By 4 to 5 months, they reach for toys. By 6 months, they reach palmar grasp and they transfer from one hand to the other, which is an important milestone. They start mouthing or putting things in their mouth. Again, they start chewing on their hand because they start teething around the same time. By 7 to 9 months, there is a crude pincer grasp, and by 12 months, they have a fine pincer grip. So you can see here a very happy baby who is sitting without support. He's reaching for a toy. He can obviously enjoy what he's doing. He has a very nice expression. So by 6 weeks, a child starts engaging in vocalizing. Vocalizing is automatic and it can happen even in deaf children. So that alone doesn't rule out absence of deafness. By 3 months, a child starts babbling, ooh and ah sounds, and they can laugh in response. By 6 months, the babbling is more complex with consonant sounds and they can turn to sound. By 9 months, there is more babbling, including mama, dada sounds, but there is no meaning to the words. Of course, some clever babies may start making words with meaning even by 9 months. And by 12 months, the words with meaning start coming up. Remember that even though we say cleverer children may do faster, it doesn't mean that the ones who do it faster will necessarily be clever in the future. And also, it doesn't mean that the ones who are producing it slower will be less intelligent in the future. So don't come to any interpretation in terms of future intelligence when the developmental milestones. You may have some clues to it, but it doesn't definitely translate. It depends a lot on how what happens subsequently. So as the child gets older, the task becomes more complex. So you expect a child to start climbing stairs, jumping, hopping, and the grip starts refining and they can start drawing shapes. They can mimic a vertical line by 2 years. They can draw a circle by 30 months. They draw a horizontal line by 3 years and so on. So they can also use building blocks to make tower, gate, train, steps in order. So more complex tasks take time. Sometimes they imitate what you're doing first before they can do it on their own. And of course, we have form boards and small jigsaws, which they can start solving by 18 months to 2 years. The more complex ones take time. You can notice that they are increasingly independent, and there is also increasing muscle power and tone as they start growing. So a child can kick a ball, they can throw by 2 years and so on. And in terms of language as well, the receptive language increases, the vocabulary rapidly develops, and the sentence structure more elaborate. The grammar starts coming by 2.5, 3 years as well. Of course, lisping is normal till 3 to 4 years in some babies, and grammar doesn't definitely develop very well until school age, but some grammar structure comes in. Attention span improves, and this is very important as well, that screen time will reduce your attention spans to avoid that. It's very important to engage in play activities which are appropriate, bring in other friends if possible to play with them. Bowel and bladder control and toilet training also happen from 18 months to 2 years onwards. There is a range of progress in this, so discuss with your pediatrician. It depends on your interest when you want to start training. Training too early doesn't really help, but 18 months to 2 years is a time that you need to focus and progress. And the child starts learning rules. Discipline is very important from 6 months onwards. So the child starts stretching their boundaries. They will test you. So don't think that the child who is young doesn't need discipline. You set the rules, and by allowing more relaxed rules and by breaking the rules at times yourself, you are confusing the child. So be consistent. Discuss with all the family members to be consistent as well. So you can see that this child is able to build a block in different shapes. He's also holding a car. He can probably push it. So he's around 2 to 2.5 years of age. And this is an example of a form board. So different shapes fit in different blocks. Some children are very quick at it. From 18 months to 2 years, they can start doing it as well. So this is a good toy for a baby of 18 months to 2 years. And these are the kind of toys which you should encourage because they engage attention. And the material should be appropriate. It shouldn't have cheap paints, and so buy it from reliable sources. And the choking hazard is very important when we choose toys for children because very fine parts of the toy may be swallowed. There's a risk of choking by entering the airway. So every child should have key milestones monitored at pediatric and GP visits and during the vaccine visits as well. If a child has risk factors, as we discussed, like prematurity or family history of developmental delay, we need closer follow-up. If you have picked up a problem, you definitely need to review sooner to make sure there is no progression. And if there is progression, you need to refer them to a neurologist or developmental specialist. There should be a system to assess hearing and vision, as we discussed as well. And we should have a support system. If you have picked up an abnormal development, what do we do next? Most children nowadays, we go to normal schools with additional support. We don't want to send them to special schools unless it's really difficult to manage them in a normal school. You have a big spectrum of developmental disorders. I will not be discussing them in detail, but you have, of course, a range of normal development. You have simple developmental delay and they may develop to be normal later on, or they may have a mild learning difficulty where we have IQ range of normal, and if they're slightly below the normal IQ range, they may learn slow, but they do function as reasonably normal adults. Cerebral palsy is a movement-related problem. We may have regression of milestones in neurodegenerative problems, which are quite serious. Learning difficulty, mental retardation, we used to call that. And hearing or vision-related problems could impair development. We have coordination problems where the execution of tasks is not appropriate. And we have the pervasive developmental disorders, which is like the autism spectrum. So again, there are playlists on child development, there are playlists on nutrition, and I hope this overview has been useful to you as a parent. And as I said, with this, I will finish this presentation and we'll have questions. And you don't need to restrict yourself to questions related to the topic itself. You can ask me any general questions, maybe nutrition, feeding, skincare, any topic is fine. So Sylvia, I'll stop this.